Welcome into a brand new edition of ACC Baseball Etc, presented as always by our friends at Academy Sports and Outdoors. Prepare for takeoff because Academy Sports and Outdoors is your new home for Jordan Brand. Gear up today and take flight on the court, off the court, and above the court. Make your play in the latest head-to-toe Jordan gear for the entire family. Available in-store and at academy.com. Elevated styles and shoes for everyone. Unstoppable value every day. Unleash your greatness with Jordan at Academy Sports and Outdoors. I'm Daron Vaught. Bradley Smart of ACC Extra is with me. Bradley, do you own a pair of Jordans?
I do not. I do not own a pair, but now I got to go out there and get some.
You got to go to Academy and get a pair of Jordans. I'm not a sneaker guy myself. I have a friend whom I used to work with, actually, and he is like a total Jordan sneakerhead collector, right? So he lived or he grew up in Virginia near where I did, and he went to UConn to school. He actually swam at UConn, and he had so many Jordans as like an 18-year-old young boy that when he moved to Connecticut to go to college, he took out like a storage unit to keep all of his shoes safe at home. Wild stuff. So I through his friendship, I know way more about like the retro Jordan sneaker game than I'd ever bargained for. I don't know, maybe I'll go to Academy Sports and Outdoors and pick out a pair. It's a little out of character for me, but I think I could do it, right?
Yeah, kickstart a new obsession.
I don't know that I need it to be an obsession, Bradley, but you know, it's a nice new pair of shoes to go bopping around in over the summer, right? Maybe that's the idea. So here's what I want to do with this episode. I was listening to the Nerdcast over on the D1 Proper Pod, where they talk through and set and project the field of 64. And they're, I think, in the mode where they're going to do it weekly now because we are in the stretch. Like a month to go in the regular season. They, of course, cover everyone. And there are some ACC teams that as I was listening, found myself wondering, okay, well, like, what's the picture? What's the postseason path for Miami, for instance? I just had Boston College, Wake Forest. It occurs to me, BC is not way off the radar. They need to do some work in these last few weeks. But I was curious, okay, what do we think they need to do? And if they do X, they should get in, right? So this is not a necessary conversation for every ACC team, of course. So some of these are going to be quickly dismissed because they're either in for sure or they're out of the picture entirely. But I do want to sort of just sift through, Bradley, what's left to be played, what the possibilities are. Maybe we've got a chaos scenario or two that would be fun and enjoyable for our purposes because it gives us lots to talk about, but not necessarily for the teams because that would be stressful. So maybe the best bet is to just pull up the standings and kind of go one by one. And I think for the higher up teams, maybe it's worth considering, okay, how likely do we think it is that they're going to be a top 8 or a top 16 to host a regional? Who is maybe just outside of that host picture as well, right? Does that make sense? So I just want to give listeners our best shot at, okay, maybe you're just dropping in if you're a Wake Forest fan and you've been tied up with other stuff. Maybe you're just getting locked in for the season. You say, oh, well, we were ranked pretty highly. That's changed. What's the big picture now? So I guess we could just start from the top of the standings and move our way down. Does that work for you?
Yeah. I think the fun part about this stretch run is you have two types of races. You have the race for, the top 8 national seed. Like, you get to host regionals and super regionals. You have the race to host, to be in the top 16. And then on the other side of the ACC standings, you have fighting for your life to get into the field of 64. So I think it's great that no matter where you are in that table, there's something that, needs to be sorted out in the last month.
Yeah, and it makes it fun because everyone's playing for something still. So let's start with Florida State, and I should have pulled up the projected field of 64 as of this week's Nerdcast. Let me do that real quick so we can talk about where teams are and talk about it against that, right? So, wow, we post a lot at D1 Baseball. Holy cow.
Productive.
Trying to find the field. I pulled up. All right. So here I went to Instagram to get the graphic of the field of 64 projections. So we got it. All right. Okay. So as of right now, Florida State is the number 6 national seed, hosting both regionals and supers if they should win. Do we think they're a lock for a top 8 necessarily?
Yeah, so I think it's going to really kind of come down to, potentially, obviously depends on how everything plays out. Florida State plays North Carolina in the last weekend of the season. And right now, D1, we project, or the Nerdcast projects North Carolina as the number 9 national host, which obviously is just outside the top 8. And I think that projection is sort of based on Florida State winning that series. Because I think you could easily see, the roles potentially flip if, North Carolina takes that series. And I think a part of the reason, obviously, those are both 2 really good teams. I think Florida State has the inside track because they're playing that game or that series at home. So I think for Florida State, it's, there's a big series. Obviously, they're Louisville this week. They got Clemson the week after. Road trip to Cal, but then, they close at North Carolina. Excuse me. So I think that's kind of the jostling there between those 2 teams.
Yeah, I don't know that I realized until I started thinking about this exercise that Florida State still has so much left to play in their schedule. I mean, at Louisville, that's a ranked opponent, one of the better ACC teams. And then they play Clemson and North Carolina, but they host both of them. There's a scenario here where Florida State performs particularly well in those 3 weekends. And again, assuming they at least get 2 of 3 at Cal. There's a scenario where they're in play for like a top overall seed at number 1 if they perform a certain way.
Yeah, if they have, I think I was doing some sort of back of the napkin math, and I think they have the 3rd hardest ACC schedule left if you just sort of average out, because there's 6 teams that play conference weekends each of the last 4. So like a bunch of the teams have breaks for finals, like Duke plays Radford, Georgia Tech plays, Western Carolina, but Florida State, yeah, they've got Louisville, Clemson, and obviously Cal's kind of buried in the standings right now, but that's a road series. But then you come back and you have North Carolina. They win all those series. They're in a really, really good spot because that means you took, that's 3 ranked series wins in 4. And the RPI, you're going to just keep climbing up. And they're obviously already, I think, top 10 mark. So, yeah, they'd definitely be in a really good position for a really high national seed.
Yeah, and that's not to overlook the trip to Cal because that is such a different road trip. And it's not like Florida State has dealt with that earlier this season, right? It's not like they went to Stanford or anything. So that is a very difficult last stretch for them. And I've got a feeling we're going to say that about a lot of these teams. So moving to Clemson, this is, as D1 projects it currently, the number 2 national seed. They get a big one starting at the time of us recording this. They play tonight their game 1 in a series against NC State. That's in Raleigh. Next week, they go to Florida State, as we mentioned. They've got a game at Coastal Carolina, which is their final midweek game remaining. Then they host Duke, and they finish at Pitt. Look, I mean, I think it's safe to say they're the number 2 national seed as we speak. They could finish as the number 1. Let me ask it this way, Bradley. What would need to happen for Clemson to drop out of the top 8?
That's a good question. I think obviously they'd lose those NC State and Florida State series, but those are tricky because they're both on the road. So it's like, how much do you ding them for it? I think if they were emphatically, swept aside somehow, they'd fall pretty far. But I mean, they haven't lost a series all year. Like, that alone is a pretty impressive fact. So I think if they, drop those series, they'd slide down a bit for sure. Florida State would jump them. But I think what would probably have to happen is they'd have to just go on an unprecedented skid. Like, they'd have to drop that Duke series as well, which would be, 3 straight series losses, which, if you just look at how this Clemson team plays, feels impossible. But yeah, I think they're just in such a good position. I mean, that win against Georgia is a huge one that they just had. I think it was just methodical and a clean midweek win, which helps them. But yeah, they gotta take care of business against NC State and Florida State for sure. Because NC State's a team we'll talk about, but is certainly starting to rise as well.
Yeah. I'm looking at this, and it would almost take a historically noteworthy slide to end the season, right? Like, I mean, they're positioned at number 2. If you lose one of those NC State, Florida State series and take care of business where you should the rest of the way, like, I think you're still a top 8 if you're Clemson. So yeah, they're in a great position. In the standings, we then move to Georgia Tech, who, because of a sweep, is no longer in the projected host mix. So they're not a top 16 seed. They're a 2, and I think they were going to Auburn, maybe. Is that right? Or Georgia? One of the 2. I saw various projections had them at both. So Georgia Tech hosts Virginia this weekend in Atlanta. Then they have one of those off-week series you were talking about. They host Western Carolina. Interestingly enough, they've got 3 against Virginia. Then it's 3 against Western. They have a midweek against Georgia Southern, and then Mercer the next day. So they've got a pretty big gap. I mean, 5 consecutive non-conference games is about as many as you'll see at this point in the season for anybody. So they host Virginia. They host Louisville after that stretch of non-con games, and then they finish at Duke. What do you see as sort of like the pocket for Georgia Tech in terms of their ceiling, their floor? They've lost 5 straight, including the sweep at the hands of Miami.
Yeah, I mean, the offense has to get going. Obviously, that's been the biggest problem. But yeah, they win. If you look at kind of the week by week projections for the field of 64, they kind of went from, I think almost a top 8 to, out of the hosting conversation for the week, which is what happens when you lose 5 in a row at this point in the season. But yeah, I mean, they need to get back on track. And I think this Virginia series is, I don't want to say like a trap series, but it's one where Virginia knows what it needs to do to get, and we'll obviously talk about them more, but Virginia knows what it needs to do to get back into the picture. And Georgia Tech's kind of, stumbling along a bit. So it could, like, they're safely in pretty much. Like, it's, they've played really well all season, but hosting kind of gets decided by how you handle the last month. So to get back into the mix, I mean, the Louisville Duke series to end the year are really big for them. Those are 2 teams that are pretty high in the RPI right now. But yeah, you can't overlook, the 8 games before that, which obviously Virginia has had an up and down year, but it's Virginia. And then, yeah, you can't lose any of those. I think Western Carolina is like 120th in RPI. Like you gotta win those ones. So it'll be really interesting to see what version of Georgia Tech we get down the stretch, because like you don't want to write anyone off after 5 games. Like it's baseball. Like you hit a slump, but they do need to get going, because that sweep at Miami really dropped them down.
Yeah, they've played really well at home this season. Every game they have remaining, except for the Duke series, is at home, for whatever that's worth, which is a long stretch. I mean, that is 11 of their last 14, and 11 straight are played at home. So that is cause for a positive outlook for Georgia Tech, but you're right. They feels like they need to figure it out. Okay, NC State next in the conference standings at 12-6 in the ACC. They are back into the top 25 here at D1 Baseball, and they are playing particularly well. What winners of 4 in a row? 31st is their RPI. I'm curious, Bradley, what it would take for NC State to get into the hosting mix. And I don't think a top 8 is out of the realm of possibility, even if it is maybe a long shot for them. But we talked about the remaining schedule for them and others. I mean, they've got Clemson at home. They're at Miami, at North Carolina, and then they finish with Stanford at home. Obviously, Clemson and at North Carolina are big opportunities. And they've got a couple midweeks with UNC Wilmington. I would suspect maybe one or both of those might get banged for air quotes rain. We'll see. UNC Wilmington is down a step from where they typically have been in previous years. So this is where it gets interesting, because we're going to talk about Miami, and they're sort of close, but maybe not in the field of 64 right now. They're going to need this series when they host NC State. The Wolfpack took 2 of 3 from Clemson at Clemson last year. And at the time, the Tigers were also ranked number 2 in the country. So just something to think about this weekend. That obviously would go a long, long way for NC State. How do you view sort of their postseason picture?
Yeah, I mean, they're playing, it's a classic Elliott Avon team. Like, they're playing their best baseball right now, unsurprisingly, down the stretch. And I think right now they're very quickly climbing that. Aaron Fitt does a great job in his, postseason stock report of sort of organizing, safely a host on the bubble in, like, yep, they'll host, or on the bubble out. And right now NC State's on that bubble out of hosting. But what helps them is, so they're 12-6 in the ACC, which is great. And, if you go 6-6 the rest of the way, that's 18 wins with a good RPI. And that's not easy by any means, but and even if you go 7-5, like, you got a really real chance to be hosting. And the other thing that helps them is Louisville, which we'll talk about as well, as a team that's, right there, better RPI, trying to get into the hosting picture as well. And NC State took 2 or 3 from them, which will help them when you're kind of sorting through that hierarchy. But yeah, I mean, if they can pull off a series against Clemson, carry that over into that, keep building off that, take, the Miami series. They probably wouldn't even need to take the North Carolina series, but, just get one and then take care of business against Stanford. And that's a hosting resume, like, easily, I think.
Yeah. Next is North Carolina, 13-8 in the conference. This is the team, besides Clemson, that has what I would refer to as the best composite ranking. And that is, I'm looking at RPI, DSR. They're 7 in both. It's a very high rank, yet they find themselves just on the outside of national top 8 seed. North Carolina the rest of the way. They, of course, have NC State second to last weekend of the year. They finish at Florida State, as you alluded to. In the meantime, it's a lot of non-conference for them, which again, we'll see how many of those mysteriously disappear from their schedule. They do have George Mason, which I think would be a pretty decent one to keep. And but they're at Pitt this weekend. Then comes the weekend off with exams and whatnot. I say off. They've got George Mason, Queens, and Campbell lined up for the next couple of weeks. And then NC State. They are at home for NC State and then at Florida State. I mean, I think we can just suffice it to say that a lot is going to come down to that final weekend at Florida State, unless something chaotic happens. And I think that just for sake of brevity here can maybe just be what we say about North Carolina. So then moving down, well, let's do this. Let's take a quick pause to say, okay, who are we not going to address in the final 10, 15 minutes here? Like who's out of it?
Yeah. I mean, Pitt is pretty buried at this point. They're 5-13 in league play. They have, in theory, if you take like a golden outlook to the rest of the season, they have the hardest schedule remaining. They're home 3 of the 4 weekends, but it's North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Clemson at home, and Wake Forest away, which if you turn it around quickly, like that's gonna boost a lot, but that's a gauntlet. And then the 2 West Coast teams, they're both 6-15. They've really struggled, Stanford and Cal, to get going. So those 3 are the teams that, as of sort of now, are just kind of not even on the bubble, and they'd have to do some pretty substantial work to get back into that mix.
Yeah. Man, it's unfortunate. And like Stanford, obviously they were ranked at one point after those first 2 conference weekends. And I kind of had high hopes for Cal at a certain point. I thought, it's a decent offense. I have become, everyone knows it, enamored by their ace, Austin Turkington. So they've been a tough out in a series, at least one game for a lot of the season. So it bums me out, especially those guys, their first year in the league, that it would have been nice to have some better play from those teams out West. And again, it's not over, but we'll see how things shake out. College baseball fans, are you ready to turn up the volume on your tailgate this season? Turtlebox Audio isn't just about great sound. They're all about being loud. Whether you're at the ballpark before a game or hosting a backyard barbecue, Turtlebox's rugged speakers deliver booming, crystal clear audio. Visit turtleboxaudio.com and get your hands on the official speaker of D1 Baseball. All right, so moving along. Duke is next in the pecking order here. Runes was on earlier this week with Mike Monaco. He and the 2 of them with Danny Wexelman have on ESPNU on Sunday the annual ALS awareness game. It's Miami and Boston College at Fenway Park. So they were talking about that, but also he sort of quickly put out my fire on Duke, because I just had said they were my watched pot. I wasn't talking about them for several weeks. They've played themselves back into at least a point of me talking about them and wanting to talk about them. And Runes was pretty adamant. He's like, they're a regional team. And I think that's it. And I'm not saying that's an unfair assessment, but it took some of the wind out of my sail when I mentioned them. It's like, hey, first time I've gotten to talk about them in a few weeks, or first time I've allowed myself to talk about them in a few weeks. They've won 4 in a row. Their RPI is up to 37. They're 12-9 in the league. And I think at this point they're pretty firmly in. I don't know. I mean, I guess all of these could turn into disaster scenarios if a team just decides it wants to lose out or whatever. But Duke's got some opportunity and a lot of home games remaining. So they finished the conference schedule hosting Virginia Tech this weekend, at Clemson, and then hosting Georgia Tech. So again, some opportunity there. I don't think we need to project that they win on the road at Clemson. But if they play well otherwise, and even in that series despite a loss, what do we think? I don't think they would need to win that Clemson series to get up into the hosting picture at the very least, right? But they're barring any kind of disaster. I think they're like safely in.
Yeah, and I think I'm also high on Duke. I like Duke a lot, and I think you can kind of trace back to the Stanford sweep. That was like they'd won some series before that, but that was like the low point. Like they went out to Stanford, 3 uncompetitive games. They come back, they shuffle their pitching, they move Owen Prosh into the rotation, and the North Carolina series decided by the thinnest of margins, 2 1-run losses. The Miami series was kind of them. It's just one of those weekends, like on the road, it kind of catching a hot team. Like they rebounded. They've won the 4 games in a row since then. I think they've got a really good chance to, take 2 of the final 3 series. Like I think Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech are winnable for them. And right now I'm pretty sure they're a 3 seed.
They are, according to the projections this week, they're a 3 in the Conway Regional with Coastal Carolina.
Oh, they'd actually probably love to stay in the Conway Regional.
Yeah,
they have good times there. But I think they could climb up that ladder a bit. But that would be a good spot for them considering their history.
Yeah, No, Duke hits the ball really well there in Conway. So that might be like the best possible scenario at this point for them, right? Rather than it's you weigh the pros and cons of hiking upward in the standings. And, there's a chance that this depends on the way Coastal plays in the final stretch too, right? So if they're out of that number 12 national spot, you could move up or down with them. And
just keep pace.
Yeah, just keep pace with the Chants, Duke. That's your best chance, I think. That's it. All right, so that's Duke. I'm glad to hear somebody else say that they like Duke. I've taken some flack for that, and I'm not saying they're going to Omaha, but it's a team that I like. Let's see, Louisville at 10-8. In the conference standings. This is another interesting one, 21 RPI. And Louisville in the recent field of 64 projections is the 2 seed in Nashville at number 8 Vanderbilt. So this occurs to me. I think Louisville's got a shot to play into a hosting scenario. They need to pitch better, and for their final stretch of games, they've got Florida State at home this weekend. Obviously, they go to Notre Dame, they're at Georgia Tech, and then they host Wake Forest, which could be Wake Forest is kind of a wild card. That could be a very interesting series to finish out the year. Even though it's on the road, I would expect the series win at Notre Dame. Georgia Tech, who knows, right? If they continue their landslide, that could be a very different series on May 9th, 10th, and 11th. So this is not past this weekend in Florida State. It's not a treacherous outlook for Louisville.
Yeah. And to your point, like they do need to pitch better. And I think it was kind of, they had a good opportunity with road series or a road game against Kentucky, who's, top 30 RPI. They'd beaten them earlier in the year. They were coming off, even without 2/3 of their weekend rotation, pitched pretty well at Clemson. And then they give up 17 runs and get just demolished. And I think Dan McDonnell apologized to fans in the post game.
I hate that. I hate when coaches feel the need to apologize. That's tough.
Yeah. And so the pitching's the biggest thing. Like Florida State, Georgia Tech, Wake, even some guys in the Notre Dame lineup, like they will punish that. Like Notre Dame's lineup has been kind of up and down, but Florida State will take their walks. Georgia Tech certainly will. Wake also prolific working accounts. And so the opportunity to play into a host is there, but there's that big caveat where it's, do we get consistently good pitching? And can they, not run into the, atrocity that was the NC State series where, the offense, the first two games played all well, 11 runs, 25 runs, but then, you lose that first one just because you're walking every other batter. So I think Louisville is a very interesting team because they have the path. They certainly could play into hosting, but they've got to find consistency to do so.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Notre Dame's lineup because I sort of dismissed it. But that is the way they've been hitting lately, especially. That's the kind of lineup that could win 12 to 11 games against Louisville if you don't tighten it up for the Cardinals. So Louisville's interesting. That is a fascinating final few ACC series to me. All right, let's quickly make our way through some of the more interesting ones here. What do you give we're going down the standings, both at 9-9, Virginia and Miami. Miami's got the better shot simply because of their RPI, right? Miami's at 35. Virginia, the lowest RPI in the conference at 93. And it's because of some losses on their schedule. This is, again, pretty heavily Miami has the better shot of these two.
Yeah, they're two really interesting teams. Miami kind of vaulted. So in the latest field of 64, they swapped them. So the week before Virginia was in, because, the road trip to Florida State, even if they lost that series, it was going to help their RPI. And obviously that series did not happen. And so Virginia's now kind of in got to win kind of everything. And the Georgia Tech series, I talked about it earlier. That's a big one. The Miami series 2 weeks from then is also a huge one because they're going to be most likely right around each other. And then they get the rivalry series with Virginia Tech to end the year. So I think they got to win, maybe 13 or 14 of their last 18, I think is what the Nerdcast kind of to get them back into, a safe space. Miami, meanwhile, has got a good chance with the schedule. BC, who's another kind of bubble team, that's a big road series for them. And then, NC State, Virginia, Notre Dame, I think they can get in, drop the NC State series, Virginia, Notre Dame, close it out like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a few of the next teams in there. Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Boston College. BC's won 4 in a row. This is interesting because they're sort of, they're lower in the RPI than the others, right? And I think Wake Forest is at this point still in, but they could mess around and play their way down closer to a bubble. Virginia Tech is interesting, 32 in the RPI. They're actually higher in the DSR slightly than Wake Forest. Now, again, the committee is not definitively using DSR this year. That's maybe a thing that comes next year, but it's just something to look at for comparison's sake. Weirdly, they've got very similar resumes, Wake and Virginia Tech, both 10-11 in the conference. Wake is 27-15 overall. Virginia Tech's 26-15 overall. Wake's RPI 24. Virginia Tech's is 32. Yet I feel like Wake is way more comfortable.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. They're both in at the moment, but they're both at the last two safely in the ACC. I feel like Wake has a much better chance of closing strong than Virginia Tech, just because they have Stanford, which is away, but Stanford's not been playing well. They have, I think, Gardner-Webb non-conference, and then home versus Pitt, which should help them, and away. The Louisville series we talked about could go any number of ways based on how the Cardinals have been pitching. So I think Wake's in a solid spot. Virginia Tech's not, like Duke and Pittsburgh away before, Mercer non-conference and Virginia home. I do think just based on the preseason expectations, like if you evaluate sort of talent, Virginia Tech finds a way, but they're banged up all throughout that lineup and rotation. And Wake obviously lost Ethan Conrad, but I think the overall level of Wake, it's easier to be more confident in them down the stretch, just because with Virginia Tech, they've been getting it done, obviously, but that bullpen's thin, the rotation, if you don't get some length, it gets kind of piles up on you. So I like both of those teams to make it and sort of finish in a good spot. But yeah, it's certainly it's interesting to see them both at that 10 and 11 point.
Yeah, quickly, as the recent projection of Field of 64 has it, the number 4 national seed is LSU. Wake Forest is the 2 seed in Baton Rouge, which feels like a pretty tough assignment. Also, Tennessee is the number 5 national seed. Virginia Tech currently the number 2 in Knoxville. Pretty tough assignments for both of those teams. But again, both currently number 2s. That's pretty firm, right? That is, you gotta mess up a lot to play your way out of that. All right. Give me what you got on Boston College. 50th in the RPI. They've won 4 in a row. Notre Dame trails them in the conference standings by 2 games. So I think Notre Dame at 7-14, it might not quite be worth talking about them just yet as somebody who could sneak in. But BC with a good series victory over Wake Forest, and they've won consecutive ACC series for the first time all season. This is a team that it is a very Todd Interdonato team. They do not have a lot of star power, but they're going to nickel and dime you in the batter's box and on the base paths, and they're going to get everything they can out of what they can. They finish with Miami this weekend, which is a huge series given their placement in the standings. And then they've got Stanford at home and they're at Cal. I mean, this is a doable remaining schedule. I just wonder, Bradley, even with wins, does their RPI hike up enough from 50?
Yeah, so they avoided kind of an almost catastrophe last night playing UMass Lowell. They go down in the 9th, end up walking it off. UMass Lowell is 277th in the RPI, and they play them 2 more times, which is kind of the classic Northeast issue with, especially late in the season. Like you play a lot of road trips, or you do a lot of road trips to start. You try to play some good teams because once you get past, and for BC in particular, once you get past, UConn, Northeastern, if you're not playing those schools, you end up playing some teams that are going to be pretty low. But I do think like the 4 wins in a row, they're back over 500. So if they can actually get in now, which they couldn't have, 2 games ago. But I think the path is pretty clear. Just win these 3 series. Ideally, you win, 5 of 6 of the Stanford Cal ones. Because, emphasis on the Stanford because they're, top 50 RPI. And I think you'll feel pretty solid. It really would depend on how everything kind of shakes out. But if you had a very strong finish, like say BC, if BC sweeps those 2 series, which I don't think they will, but if they did and took 2 of 3 from Miami, that's 8-1. They finish, 17-13 in the ACC. That feels great. Yeah. I don't know what it looks like if they're 15-15. So I think that's certainly an interesting one. And then Notre Dame's a team. I was actually just talking to Sean Stifler yesterday about, because they finally won a series in the ACC, which they had a gauntlet. Like they drew the worst possible draw in the ACC this year, but they didn't get swept over and over and over again. Like they won games. Like they took one from Florida State, took one from Virginia Tech. Should have probably had that BC series, but they didn't get swept.
Usually game one of series that the ones that they won, but I remember at Clemson was the one where they lost the first two and then pulled out a Sunday win, and it was just kind of like, okay, nice. That's it's good for them to fight for that one win.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of why I have some confidence in them, because it's hard to win Fridays or the first game of a series. And with Jack Riddell, they've won 4 Fridays in a row. Like that's something that's kind of overlooked, which granted that happens when you lose the next 2 games in the series and that kind of enthusiasm fizzles a bit. But I really like Riddell and Fox at the top of that rotation. And I think they obviously at 7-14, like they have a lot of work to do. But keep up the kind of, they've won 5 straight. Take care of business versus Cal, which again, tough matchup. Like you could really see it going anyway. But if Notre Dame keeps building off that, the Louisville series will be tough, but that Miami one could be huge for RPI and for sorting through the ACC at the end of the year.
Yeah, and they've got that off week non-conference series. Bowling Green's not terrible. I mean, it's a 120-ish or so RPI, I think. It could be worse. So a series win there is I guess decent. It's probably not going to do anything for your own RPI, but having a manageable series there, I don't know that matters, but just for whatever it's worth, it's there.
Yeah, and I think the last game there's away. Like I think it's 2 in Notre Dame, unless there's something wrong on this schedule I'm looking at. But I think there's 2 in South Bend and then 1 at Bowling Green. Which
interesting.
A road would help.
Yes, yeah, on the road against Bowling Green would help. Yeah, it looks like, interesting.
Yeah.
Unless again that's an error on the site. It's an interesting way to do it on that off week.
Yeah, I just double checked it, and they go to it's Saturday or Friday, Saturday in South Bend, then they go to Bowling Green.
Innovative, I guess. I don't know what the reasoning for that would be, other than to show some love for Bowling Green. But turns out it turns it into a road game when Notre Dame probably is going to need a win on the road. So. Nice. That works out for Stiff and the Irish. Anything else worth noting about postseason picture and the ACC? These are such crucial weeks, right? When we start talking about hosting and even teams getting in. I think the bubble is going to harden up a little bit as we go. Little bit of, if it can happen, it probably will in terms of some chaos scenarios. I think we will get something along those lines. But that was good. I think that's the snapshot of everybody's chances and outlooks at this point. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think we did a solid job there. The other thing that is, less, I mean, it's important, but we just talked a lot about the NCAA tournament. The other races within the league are going to be for the top 4 seeds and then the 4 seeds after them, going into that new bracket format where, you get the double bye or the single bye. And I think there's like 4 games separating the top 10 or something. So I think that's another thing. As teams are trying to get into hosting position or even, strengthening their resumes, you're also going to see there's not a lot of separation, especially at the top right now. I was talking to you about this before, but there's like a reasonable set of results this weekend that ends with, 6 teams tied in winning percentage at the top.
Yeah.
So
which
it'll
again,
be fun
given the seeding for the conference tournament, that matters. And what's interesting too, but like bubble-ish teams, there's a scenario where maybe you don't want the bye. Does that make sense? Because it would give you a chance at another game. Because it's a single elimination tournament now. You can't do a ton of harm to your resume, I don't think, in the ACC tournament, and I think that's by design. That's part of the reason for going to this. If you're firmly in and you lose a game to another good RPI team in your conference tournament, it's not going to ruin you unless you're on the absolute edge. But if you're a team that needs to stack up big wins, maybe you're okay with that 5 spot instead of the 4. And, it's just another chance to get another win. And the quality of the win from one round to the next is not going to vary so greatly that one is better than the other, right? So it'll be really interesting to see who shuffles into what positioning and who needs what going into the conference tournament with the new format in mind. Yeah,
for sure. And it's just like I did like a sort of loose simulation, one of those classic, like let's use ELO ratings and do like 10,000 simulations. And I think the last one I ended up with, there was like 12 of the 16 ended up in one simulation or the other, like at 4 or 5. And it was like, okay, so everyone could feasibly make a run. I think it's gonna be a really great last month.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. As this was, Bradley. Great stuff. Laying out the postseason paths for everybody in the ACC. Make sure to check out Bradley's stuff at ACC Extra. He is just pushing out stuff. It's all great. Promo code, in case you don't have a subscription, Omaha 30%, I have been told, is as high as it will get in a given year. I think that's as high as I've ever seen it. So I have no reason to not believe our fearless leader, Kendall Rogers, with that in mind. So Omaha 30, get your subscription for this stretch run here to finish out the season and get into the postseason. And that's it. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week on ACC Baseball Etc.